Warm welcome, dear audience. What's the time there and where are you watching this video from? Tonight, we journey back through the shadowed centuries, into a time when the nights were darker than imagination itself. Long before electric lamps or glowing screens, before city lights drowned the stars, the medieval night was an ocean of black. When the sun slipped behind the horizon, the world changed, and the simple act of sleeping became something almost mystical, bound by superstition, ritual, and survival. As twilight faded, medieval people faced a darkness so complete that even the faint outlines of their homes vanished. Only the moon and stars, when clouds permitted, offered their pale light. Inside cottages of timber and thatch, the hearth fire dimmed to embers, and families huddled close under woolen blankets. There were no street lamps, no candles burning wastefully through the night. Candles were precious, often made of tallow that reeked when burned. So, when night fell, life slowed, conversation faded, and the world grew silent. In this stillness, people prepared for their first sleep. Yes, first sleep. Medieval nights were often divided into two parts. After dusk, they would sleep for a few hours, then awaken near midnight, spending a short period in prayer, quiet talk, or tending to small tasks. Then, they'd return to their second sleep until dawn. This natural rhythm matched the cycles of light and darkness, when the body and mind followed the pulse of the earth itself. Darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was alive. It whispered through cracks in the wooden walls, carried the cries of owls, wolves, and spirits imagined by fearful minds. People believed night was a realm where the dead stirred, where fairies, demons, and witches wandered unseen. To sleep meant to surrender yourself to that unknown, to trust your soul would wake with the morning sun. For peasants, the bed was a shared space. Entire families, sometimes even animals, slept together for warmth. Straw-stuffed mattresses called polyossi lay upon wooden frames or directly on the floor. The wealthy, meanwhile, slept in curtained beds that enclosed them in velvet darkness, both for privacy and protection against the cold. The heavy drapes also kept away insects and drafts, creating a miniature cocoon in a world of frost and fear. Before sleep, rituals mattered. Some made the sign of the cross, others muttered charms to keep nightmares or night hags away. Doors were bolted tight, windows shuttered, and iron objects placed near the bed, believed to repel evil spirits. Dreams were not dismissed as fantasy, they were messages from God, omens of illness, or glimpses of future sorrow. Waking from a nightmare was more than fright, it was a spiritual event. The dark also shaped social behavior. In villages after sundown, the world belonged to thieves, spirits, and wanderers. Lawmen warned people to stay indoors. The darkness was both a veil and a danger, perfect for secrets, forbidden meetings, or acts of sin. Even love had its time under the cloak of night. When the first rooster crowed, signaling dawn's approach, sleepers stirred slowly, stretching beneath coarse blankets, the air icy on their skin. The darkness melted into grey light creeping through cracks in the walls, and the rhythm of the medieval day began again. Fires rekindled, bread baked, animals fed. The terror of night faded, but it never truly left, for each sunset brought its return. In the medieval world, sleep wasn't just rest, it was survival. To surrender to the black unknown, trusting that light would come again, was an act of faith. Every night was a reminder of human fragility, a small death before morning's rebirth. And in that endless cycle of darkness and dawn, medieval people learned to live between fear and faith, wrapped in shadows, dreaming in the deep silence of a world without light. When night blanketed the medieval world, it wasn't just a time to close one's eyes. It was a sacred rhythm of two worlds, the waking and the dreaming. People didn't sleep in one stretch like we do today. Their sleep came into parts, divided by a mysterious period in the middle of the night, a time when dreams bled into reality and silence carried whispers of the unknown. This was the era of first sleep and second sleep, a natural pattern shaped by darkness itself. After sunset, when hearth fires dimmed to glowing coals and the last chores were done, people lay down early. The first sleep began soon after dusk, a deep, heavy rest that restored weary limbs and quieted the mind. It usually lasted about 4 hours. Then, sometime after midnight, they would wake not startled, not restless but calmly aware. This waking was so common it had its own name, the watch. During this hour of stillness, entire households would stir gently in the dark. Some would sit quietly, whispering prayers or softly humming hymns. Others would tend to the fire, mend clothing by candlelight, or visit the privy outside, their path faintly lit by the pale gleam of the moon. The wealthy might read scripture or write letters by the flicker of a single beeswax candle. In monasteries, monks rose from their straw beds to chant their matins, midnight prayers that echoed through stone halls like the heartbeat of devotion. For ordinary folk, this midnight interval held many meanings. It was said that the barrier between the living and the dead thinned at this time. Those who woke might light a small taper, sit in silence, and listen to the night's strange music, the distant howl of wolves, the creak of rafters, the moan of wind over the fields. It was both peaceful and unnerving, a reminder that darkness was alive. Some used this period for more earthly pleasures. Married couples often spoke softly, shared thoughts, or even conceived children during this watch. Records and diaries suggest that intimacy came naturally during these calm hours, when the world was quiet and minds were half dreaming. Physicians of the time even advised that this was the best hour for love, when the body was refreshed and the soul serene. Yet for others, the second waking brought anxiety. In the flicker of dying embers, shadows took on shapes. A coat looked like a crouching beast, a broom like a hunched figure. The unsteady light played cruel tricks, and imagination, untamed by science or logic, filled the dark with ghosts. To protect themselves, sleepers whispered charms, prayed to saints, or clutched rosaries. Some drew chalk circles around their beds or hung iron keys above their heads to keep spirits away. After an hour or two, drowsiness returned. People would slip back into their second sleep, a lighter, dream-filled rest that lasted until dawn. This part of the night was said to bring visions, often divine or prophetic. Monks believed God spoke most clearly between midnight and morning. Peasants took their dreams as signs of harvests, illnesses, or omens of death. When morning light crept through shutters, the second sleep ended gently. The sound of animals stirring, the smell of smoke from rekindled fires, and the call of roosters announced the day. Men rose to labor in the fields, women began baking and spinning. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes, and though their nights were long and filled with shadows, people embraced them as natural. A balance between fear and peace, dark and light. In that midnight world, there was beauty in stillness. The stars were countless, the air pure, the mind calm. For a few quiet hours, time itself seemed to pause, and humanity, small and fragile, rested in the arms of the infinite night. In the medieval world, night was more than just a time. It was a living force, a creature that breathed through the rafters and whispered through the cracks of stone walls. When the sun sank behind distant hills, people did not simply turn on a lamp or pull out a phone's flashlight. They prepared for battle, not with swords and shields, but with the faintest flickers of flame. Every spark mattered, every ember was life. To keep the dark away was an act of courage, patience, and faith. The hearth was the heart of every medieval home. Long before the night fully descended, families gathered around it, feeding the fire carefully with dried wood or peat. It was the only source of light, warmth, and comfort. Children stared into its glowing depths, mesmerized by the shifting shapes of flame. The old believed they saw spirits there, protectors of the home, watchers of the night. The fire was not just warmth, it was a guardian. But even the strongest fires died. As embers dimmed and shadows stretched, people had to choose, waste precious fuel or surrender to the darkness. Most chose the latter. Candles were too costly for common folk. The rich burned beeswax pure, golden, and sweet-smelling, but peasants relied on tallow candles made from animal fat, greasy and foul in scent. When burned, they smoked and sputtered, leaving trails of soot along the ceiling beams. To save candles, many used them sparingly, only when absolutely necessary. A single candle was a treasure, often shared by an entire family. Its faint light would cast long, quivering shadows that turned rooms into forests of mystery. A child lying in bed might watch the flame and imagine angels, demons, or faraway kingdoms. The play of shadow and light made their imagination as real as the world itself. Lamps filled with oil were another luxury. In some monasteries and manors, olive oil lamps glowed softly through the night, their flames steady and clean. But in most villages, people depended on rushlights, reeds dipped in animal fat that burned unevenly, sometimes hissing, sometimes dying after a few minutes. The smell filled the house with an acrid heaviness, mingling with the scent of smoke and straw. When total darkness fell, the transformation was complete. The home changed character. Corners vanished, walls merged with the air, and every sound gained a strange power. A creak in the floor could be a thief, a fluttering in the rafters a spirit. Dogs barked at unseen shapes. Roosters crowed too early, and hearts quickened at every unfamiliar noise. For those who dared to venture outside, the world became an abyss of shadow. Only the moon offered guidance. On bright nights, travelers and watchmen trusted its silvery light. But when clouds covered the sky, the world was blind. Streets were treacherous. Wells and ditches swallowed the unwary. In towns, curfew bells tolled at dusk, warning citizens to stay indoors. After that, only the watchmen roamed, armed with lanterns and cudgels, calling out the hours to assure the sleeping that the town was still safe inside homes. People used clever tricks to fight the dark. Some placed polished metal behind candles to reflect light. Others hung mirrors near the hearth to scatter the glow. In castles, servants tended torches in hallways, replacing them as they burned down. Yet no matter how much light they made, darkness always won in the end. The night was patient. It always returned. There was also a spiritual side to this fear. Darkness was not just a physical absence of light. It was symbolic of evil, sin, and death. Priests preached that to walk in darkness was to stray from God, the devil, they said, moved unseen through the night. That belief made every extinguished flame a danger to the soul. Before bed, families prayed for protection from both earthly and unearthly harm. Deliver us from the terrors of the night, they whispered, crossing themselves as the last candle died. Yet in this very darkness, there was beauty. Under the stars, far from towns, the sky was alive, brighter than any modern city dweller could imagine. The Milky Way stretched like a river of frost across the heavens. Shepherds on the hills and monks in their cloisters watched it in awe. To them, the night sky was a cathedral without walls, and every star was a hymn. In noble halls, the wealthy dined by torchlight, their faces glowing with gold and fire. Shadows danced on the tapestries, and the flicker of flame made jewels glimmer like captured suns. The air was thick with the scent of wine, wax, and roasted meat. But even here, servants moved swiftly to snuff flames before bed, for a single spark could consume a wooden castle before dawn. Fire, the savior of night, was also its greatest threat. When all flames were gone, silence ruled. The only light left came from memory, from the faint orange ghosts of extinguished candles, lingering in the mind. And so, medieval people slept again, wrapped in darkness so complete that even dreams seemed brighter. The world outside their doors vanished into nothingness. Only the heartbeat of the night remained, the soft breath of sleepers, the sigh of wind through thatch, the quiet crackle of cooling embers. They did not fear the dark because they had no choice, but to live with it. The darkness was both enemy and friend, terror and teacher. It reminded them of their place in creation, small, fragile, and fleeting, yet capable of finding warmth and meaning in the faintest flame. To sleep in total darkness was to trust in life, in light, and in the promise that dawn would come again. And so each night the medieval world surrendered to the void, wrapped in silence, bound by ritual, guarded by faith, sleeping peacefully beneath the eternal watch of stars that had seen every generation before, and would outlast every one to come. When medieval people closed their eyes, they didn't simply rest. They entered a world between heaven and hell, a place ruled by faith, mystery, and the unseen. In the total darkness of their homes, where only the faint glow of dying embers remained, dreams were not mere illusions. They were divine whispers, warnings from the beyond, or visions of things yet to come. To dream in the Middle Ages was to walk the thin line between the mortal and the eternal. For peasants who spent their days in toil and exhaustion, dreams were the only escape from the burden of survival. Their lives were filled with hunger, labor, and prayer, and in sleep, they found a strange freedom. They dreamed of golden harvests, warm bread, or bright fields untouched by frost. Sometimes they dreamed of loved ones lost to famine or plague, and believed those spirits came to deliver messages or blessings. When dawn arrived, such dreams were shared quietly, often around the hearth, interpreted with both fear and wonder. The church taught that dreams could come from three sources: God, the devil, or one's own restless mind. Holy dreams were rare and precious. Visions of angels, saints, or glowing crosses were seen as divine gifts. But darker dreams, those filled with temptation or terror, were said to come from demons trying to corrupt the soul. Priests warned that to believe too strongly in one's dreams was dangerous, for Satan could disguise himself in comforting visions. Yet even with these warnings, the medieval fascination with dreams grew deep. People recorded their visions in journals, whispered them to priests during confession, or sought interpretation from local wise women and monks. Books known as dream manuals began to appear, written guides explaining what each symbol meant. To dream of fire might mean passion or punishment. To see water, a sign of change or cleansing. To fly, a blessing of the spirit, and to fall, a warning of pride. In monasteries, dreams were treated with reverence. Monks who experienced vivid visions might fast for days, believing that their souls had been touched by divine light. Some claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary, others the gates of heaven or the torments of purgatory. These visions were shared among the brethren and sometimes recorded by scribes. The lines between faith and imagination blurred completely. For kings and nobles, dreams carried political weight. A single vision could change the course of a kingdom. Chronicles tell of rulers who delayed wars, married foreign queens, or built churches because of what they had seen in their sleep. King Charlemagne once claimed to have dreamed of St. Peter handing him a sword, and by morning he declared a new campaign in the name of God. Dreams became weapons of legitimacy, proof that heaven favored one ruler over another. But not all dreams brought peace. In the deep, breathless hours of night, nightmares often came like thieves. Medieval people believed that nightmares were not just bad dreams, but actual beings, dark spirits or witches that sat upon the sleeper's chest, stealing their breath. They called them night hags or mara, from which the word nightmare itself was born. Those who suffered from these terrors woke drenched in sweat, unable to scream, convinced that something invisible had been pressing on their body. To ward off such evil, they used charms and rituals. Iron objects, such as keys or nails, were placed near the bed. Holy water was sprinkled on. Doorways and prayers to Saint Michael were whispered before sleep. Some hung herbs like St. John's wort or lavender near the pillow, believed to repel witches and demons alike. Even in darkness, faith became armor. Children, too, were not spared from the dream world. Their small imaginations made them vulnerable to the shadows. Parents told them to say their prayers, "Now I lay me down to sleep," for it was said that the devil lurked near those who forgot. When a child awoke crying, the mother would whisper that an angel had brushed past their soul to protect them from harm. Dreams also reflected the world's suffering. When famine struck, people dreamed of endless feasts. During plague years, they dreamed of blackbirds and pale faces. These collective visions shaped folklore and prophecy. In some villages, when several people dreamed of the same omen, a red moon, a river turning to blood, or a burning cross, it was taken as a warning of disaster. Fear spread faster than disease itself, carried on the wings of shared imagination. In castles, however, dreams were discussed with scholars and priests. The learned men tried to separate divine revelation from superstition. They studied Aristotle and St. Augustine, debated the nature of the soul in sleep, and asked whether dreams came from the stars. Some said the moon's light influenced human thought. Others believed dreams traveled through air like invisible spirits. Women, often excluded from formal study, found their own meaning in dreams. A noblewoman might dream of her husband returning from war or of a child yet unborn. Peasant women, closer to the earth, dreamed of rain for crops or of spirits haunting the fields. Their interpretations were rooted in daily survival rather than theology, but just as real, just as powerful. Sometimes entire pilgrimages began because of a dream. A man would wake claiming that St. James had called him to Compostela, or a woman that the Virgin had shown her a hidden spring with healing powers. Whether true or imagined, these dreams moved people to action. They built shrines, carved statues, and left offerings where their visions had guided them as centuries passed. Dreams became both a comfort and a torment, a secret language of the night. They reflected the fears of plague, the hope of salvation, the guilt of sin, and the desire for miracles. Each night, when the candle died and darkness consumed the world, sleepers crossed into the same invisible kingdom, one that belonged to no church or crown. And when dawn finally came, when sunlight spilled through the cracks of shutters and the cock crowed from the barn, dreams scattered like mist, the world of the waking returned, rough, cold, and real. Yet for a brief time, as they stirred beneath rough blankets, the echoes of that other realm lingered. For medieval people, to dream was to touch eternity, to hear, if only for a heartbeat, the voice of the divine whispering through the silence of the dark. As the moon climbed high and silence fell across the land, the medieval world divided itself into two very different kinds of sleep, that of the noble and that of the peasant. Though they lived under the same night sky, their beds, their comforts, and even their dreams belonged to entirely separate worlds. In one, velvet curtains and candlelight guarded rest like royal sentinels. In the other, straw, cold, and closeness were the only blankets against the darkness. In castles and manors, the wealthy slept in grand chambers built of thick stone to resist both invaders and wind. At the center of these rooms stood the bed, a magnificent frame of oak or walnut, carved with saints, flowers, or family crests. Draped in silks and lined with fur, it was a symbol of status as much as a place of rest. Curtains hung heavy from the canopy, trapping warmth and shutting out the prying eyes of servants who crept quietly through the halls. The noble-s bed was a fortress within a fortress, the last defense against the cold fingers of night. Yet even in these golden halls, darkness reigned once the candles were extinguished. The faint glow of the hearth softened the shadows, but beyond the flame's reach lay blackness as deep as any peasant's cottage. The nobles slept with daggers beside their pillows, a habit born from paranoia and old feuds. Dreams of betrayal, assassins, or ghosts were not rare in such places. Every sound in the corridor, the creak of a floorboard, the sigh of wind through an arrow slit, stirred unease. The bedding itself told the story of wealth. Feather mattresses, stuffed thick and soft, cradled the noble's body, while fine linen sheets brushed their skin like whispers. Blankets of wool and fur, sometimes lined with fox or marten, guarded against winter's bite. Pillows were filled with down, and perfumed sachets were sewn into the seams to mask the smell of smoke and sweat. For them, even sleep was touched by luxury. But outside those castle walls, under the same moon, life was starkly different. The peasants' cottages were small, smoky, and filled with the breath of livestock. A family of 5 or 6 might share a single room. At one end, the hearth glowed faintly, surrounded by drying herbs and tools. At the other, a rough straw mattress lay on the floor, or on a simple wooden frame. This was their bed, a polyossi, stuffed with reeds or old straw that crackled and flattened with each passing night. It was rarely changed and often home to insects that thrived in the warmth of bodies. The family slept close together, parents, children, and sometimes even the animals. A pig or goat might sleep nearby, not as a pet, but as living warmth. The air was thick with smoke, hay, and human scent, but the closeness was comfort. In the bitter cold of winter, the body heat of many was the only barrier against freezing. Peasants learned to sleep through the noise, the snoring, the coughs, the stirring of beasts, because exhaustion demanded it. There was no privacy in these small homes. Sleep was communal, and life revolved around rhythm rather than choice. When the father rose for work before dawn, the rest stirred too. When the baby cried, the whole room woke. There was no my bed or your bed, only the shared space of survival. Yet in this closeness, there was a kind of peace, a unity that the rich could never know. Children slept wherever there was space, on benches, in corners, even atop hay bales. Sometimes they were lulled to sleep by the steady beat of the rain on thatched roofs, the crackle of the dying fire, or the murmur of their parents' quiet prayers. For the young, the dark was less frightening. For the old, it was a reminder that death was never far. While nobles wrapped themselves in fur, peasants wrapped themselves in faith. A wooden cross above the bed, a whispered Ave Maria, or a charm made from iron or herbs hung near the sleeping place. They believed that while their eyes closed, angels watched over them, and though the darkness was full of unseen dangers, disease, spirits, and the cold itself, they faced it with the same endurance that carried them through each hard day. In the coldest months, the wealthy sometimes shared their beds too, not from need, but from custom. Ladies-in-waiting slept at the foot of noble women's beds, serving as both warmth and protection. Guests shared beds during travel, for inns were few and rooms scarce. To bed down with a stranger wasn't scandalous. It was survival. Travelers, soldiers, and pilgrims learned to trust the warmth of the human body more than the fickle mercy of a winter night. Even among the wealthy, the ritual of sleeping carried meaning. Before retiring, prayers were said aloud, thanking God for the safety of the day and begging forgiveness for sins committed. Servants would check the chamber for open flames, close shutters against the wind, and secure the door with iron bolts. Once the master of the house lay down, silence became law. Only the sound of the crackling hearth, the ticking of insects in the wood, and a whisper of night wind filled the space. Sleep was also a mirror of rank and belief. To the noble, it was a time to dream of power, and lineage to the peasant, a brief escape from endless labor. Yet both faced the same truth. When the candle died and darkness swallowed the room, all were equal beneath the night. Titles meant nothing in sleep. Death, too, came like sleep, silent, inevitable, and shared by kings and beggars alike. In that silence, the medieval world breathed together, the high towers and the low cottages, the tapestries and the straw, all united in the rhythm of night. When dawn came, smoke rose from every chimney, rich and poor alike stirring to life once more. But in those hours of pure darkness before the rooster crowed, both noble and peasant drifted through the same black sea of dreams, held by the same ancient pulse of the sleeping earth. The bed, no matter how grand or humble, was a symbol of humanity's fragile defiance, a place where the living dared to rest in a world ruled by cold, hunger, and fear. And though the candle burned longer in the castle and shorter in the hut, both flames bowed before the same darkness, and both sleepers prayed to wake again when morning light returned. When the last candle flickered out and the hearth sank into silence, the medieval world became a kingdom of shadows, a realm not ruled by kings or priests, but by fear. The night was alive to them, breathing, watching, waiting. In those long, unbroken hours between dusk and dawn, imagination walked beside faith, and the darkness outside the walls became a mirror of the darkness inside the soul. To sleep in that world was not merely to rest, it was to surrender to powers unseen. Every rustle, every whisper of wind carried meaning. The creak of timbers in a cottage might be the settling of wood, or the tread of a restless spirit. The cry of an owl, the flutter of bats, or the howl of wolves from distant woods sent chills down the spine. These were not just animals, they were omens. In villages where superstition and scripture intertwined like ivy, people believed that the night belonged to things neither wholly human nor wholly beast. Stories whispered around hearths told of night walkers, spirits of the dead who roamed because their sins were unconfessed. There were tales of changelings, pale children swapped by fairies, and mere spirits who pressed on sleepers' chests, stealing their breath. Every village had its own legend of haunted crossroads, cursed trees, or ghostly monks who walked through graveyards with hollow eyes. To laugh at such tales was foolishness, to forget them was dangerous. The church, while warning against superstition, could not banish fear. In fact, it often deepened it. Priests preached that darkness was the devil's hour, when demons were most active, seeking weak souls. Midnight was called the witching time, when witches flew unseen across the sky, their laughter carried by the wind. To guard against them, people etched crosses into doors, hung garlic or iron near windows, and prayed before bed. The sign of the cross became a shield, and faith itself a weapon. Peasants believed the devil could enter through cracks, keyholes, or even dreams. Some kept a candle burning all night, not for light, but to keep evil spirits away. Though few could afford such waste, others scattered salt across thresholds, for salt was sacred, pure, and untouchable by evil. Mothers told their children never to whistle after dark, never to look into mirrors by candlelight. and never to speak the names of the dead once night had fallen. The woods, beyond the safety of cottages and fields, were the most feared of all. In the black heart of the forest, where moonlight seldom reached, lurked creatures of nightmare. Wolves hunted silently, their eyes glinting like coals. Bandits hid in the trees. But worse still were the things that had no name, spirits that lured travellers from paths with the sound of voices they recognized. Men spoke of willow, the wisps, lights that danced above swamps, leading the curious to drown. And somewhere deeper, it was said, the forest itself breathed, ancient and hungry. To walk at night was to gamble with fate. The brave or the desperate carried torches and iron daggers, whispering prayers with every step. Even watchmen in towns kept close to church walls where they believed angels lingered. The curfew bells were not just laws of order, they were warnings to flee from the open dark. Once the last bell tolled, only the lost and accursed were said to wander. Inside, behind locked doors, the darkness pressed against windows like a living thing. The glow from dying embers painted strange shapes on the walls, faces, claws, shadows that moved when no one did. Families huddled together, speaking softly, listening for sounds beyond the walls. A knock, a sigh, or the dragging of feet. The fear was ancient, older than Christianity itself, born from the primal knowledge that night hid predators, both flesh and spirit. Dreams were not safe from this fear either. Those who dreamed of darkness, teeth, or falling were told to confess their sins, for such dreams meant the devil had brushed their soul. Sleep paralysis, though unnamed, was seen as possession. A sleeper frozen, unable to breathe, was said to be visited by the Mara, a night demon riding the chest. The only cure was prayer, the touch of holy water, or the tolling of a church bell. The wealthy, despite their comfort, shared this dread. In castles, the corridors echoed at night, and guards swore they heard footsteps where none should be. Servants whispered of ghostly figures gliding through stone halls, monks, knights, queens, souls trapped for their sins. In monasteries, even monks who prayed through the night feared temptation. Some claimed to see the devil himself standing at the edges of candlelight, waiting for their faith to falter. Yet fear served a purpose. It bound communities together. When the nights were long and winters endless, these stories gave shape to the unknown. They explained sickness, death, and misfortune, things no one understood. And through that fear, people found comfort in prayer, in one another, and in the small circle of light that fire provided. The dark was vast, but the flame was theirs. As dawn neared, the first hint of light turned terror into peace. The cries of night faded, the world began to breathe again. Birds sang, dogs barked, and people stepped outside to find that nothing monstrous remained. Only frost on the grass and smoke rising from chimneys. Yet the memory of the night lingered, like a ghost that never fully left. For medieval people, the fear of darkness was not foolishness, it was survival. In a world without explanation, fear kept them cautious, reverent, alive. To face the dark each night and wait to see the morning was its own quiet triumph. And though the centuries have passed and the light has conquered much of the night, something of that old terror still lives within us, the ancient memory of when we just slept in total darkness and dreamed of things that watched from the shadows, while the rest of the medieval world slept in trembling darkness. There were men who did not fear the night, they embraced it. In monasteries scattered across hills and valleys, monks rose from their straw beds long before dawn, answering a higher call. Theirs was a life ruled by the rhythm of bells, by prayer, silence, and obedience. For them, darkness was not an enemy to be feared, but a sacred veil through which they sought the light of God. When the bell tolled for matins, the midnight offers, the sound rolled through stone corridors and echoed beyond the monastery walls. The deep, solemn tone carried through the cold air, heard faintly by peasants sleeping in nearby villages. To them, it was the song of faith cutting through the heart of night. For the monks, it was a summons, a reminder that their souls must never rest, even when the world slept. Inside their cold chambers, they stirred in silence. The cells were bare, a bed of straw, a wooden cross, perhaps a single candle stub. Monks wrapped themselves in woolen robes, their breath forming mist in the frozen air. They did not complain. To rise in darkness was a test of devotion, a rejection of the comforts that tied ordinary men to the earth. One by one, They stepped into the corridor, their sandaled feet whispering on the stone floor. The only light came from a single lantern carried at the front of the line, its flame trembling as if afraid. They moved in silence to the chapel, a vast hall of echoing stone and shadow. The air smelled of wax and cold incense. Rows of wooden stalls waited, polished smooth by years of prayer. Above, stained glass windows stood black and lifeless until dawn. Yet in the darkness, the monks found peace. They believed that the soul was closest to heaven when the world was asleep, when silence reigned and temptation was far away. At the sound of the bell, they began to chant. The voices rose slowly, softly, like the first light of morning. Latin hymns filled the hall. Domine, labia me aperis. Words that praised God's mercy in the midst of darkness. Their voices blended into a single sound, neither human nor divine. Echoing through the ancient arches, outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside, the harmony of faith conquered the night. These midnight prayers were not short. Sometimes they lasted for hours. Monks stood, knelt, and rose again, their bodies weary but their spirits unwavering. Sleep was a luxury they sacrificed willingly, for they believed every lost hour of rest brought them closer to salvation, to conquer the bodies. Need for comfort was to prove mastery over sin. When exhaustion threatened, they imagined the saints, holy men who had kept vigil through storms, hunger and fear. After the final psalm was sung, the bell rang again, soft, mournful. Like a sigh, the monks filed back to their cells, moving through the dark halls like ghosts. Some paused at the door to the courtyard, gazing up at the night sky. The stars above seemed endless, each one a reminder of the Creator's hand. The moonlight painted silver patterns on the cloisters, and the air was sharp with frost. To them, this sight was a promise that even in the deepest darkness, God's light still watched from above. In the hours before dawn, some monks lay down again for their second sleep, but most did not. They used this sacred time for study or meditation, reading by candlelight, copying holy texts, or writing in silence. The scratch of quills and the flicker of flames became the only sounds. Many of the great books of the Middle Ages, illuminated manuscripts, psalters, and chronicles were born from these sleepless hours, crafted by hands steady in faith but trembling from cold. Outside the monastery walls, villagers sometimes spoke of the monks with awe, sometimes with unease. To them, these men seemed closer to angels than mortals, awake when all others slept. They wondered what secrets they learned in the dark, what visions they saw by candlelight. Some said the monks could hear the voice of God in the silence between the bells. Others whispered that ghosts of saints walked their halls, guiding their prayers. But the truth was simpler and far more beautiful. The monks had learned to make peace with the night. Where others saw fear, they saw reflection. The darkness, to them, was not emptiness but fullness, the space where the soul could hear what daylight drowned out. In silence, they faced themselves, their doubts and their faith. They believed that just as the dawn always followed the night, so too would grace follow struggle. When the bell finally called for Lord's, the morning prayer, the eastern horizon began to pale. The monks returned to the chapel once more, this time to greet the coming light. As they sang, the first rays of sunrise filtered through stained glass, turning the cold stones into rivers of color. Gold, red, and blue danced across their faces, and the chill of the night faded like a memory. The light had returned, and with it, hope renewed. To the monks, every dawn was a victory, proof that faith outlasts fear, that prayer can conquer darkness, and that even the longest night has an end. Their lives became the rhythm of this eternal truth, night and day, shadow and light, death and resurrection. In their quiet, disciplined existence, they carried the torch of belief through centuries of darkness, keeping it burning for all who were too afraid to face the night alone. And so, while the world outside feared what lurked in the shadows, the monks stood within it, unafraid, steadfast, and awake, guardians of light in a time when the world slept beneath the weight of its own darkness. When winter came to the medieval world, darkness ruled with an iron hand. Days grew shorter, nights stretched endlessly, and the sun seemed a distant, dying ember. The cold crept into every crack of every cottage, whispering promises of hardship. It was in these endless winter nights that the true strength of the human spirit was tested, where warmth, faith, and endurance became the only shields against despair. For peasants, winter was both enemy and teacher. After the final harvest, the fields lay empty beneath blankets of frost. The air smelled of wood smoke and snow, and silence spread across the land like a spell. People retreated indoors into cottages barely large enough for their families and animals. Cows, goats, and chickens shared the same space as their masters, not out of convenience but survival. Their breath and bodies gave warmth to the frozen air, the mingling scent of hay, smoke, and life itself filled the dim interior, wrapping all who lived there in a shared struggle. The nights were unbearably long, with the sun setting before supper and not rising again until what felt like eternity. People turned to routine and ritual to hold back the fear of endless dark. Before bed, families gathered by the hearth, their only light, their only comfort. Flames danced upon rough stone walls, casting long shadows that moved like spirits of the old world. Children listened to stories told in hushed voices, tales of saints, ghosts, and heroes who braved nights even darker than theirs. Each story was a spark of hope, a reminder that light always returns. When the fire burned low, they banked the embers carefully, covering them with ash to keep them alive till dawn. Then they crawled under heavy wool blankets or animal skins, huddled close to one another. The bed was not a private space, but a fortress of warmth. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, all wrapped together in a cocoon of shared heat. The cold outside howled through the cracks, but inside, their togetherness was a kind of magic. Yet not every cottage was safe. Poorer families often ran out of wood before winter's end. Some froze in their sleep. Others burned damp straw, which filled their homes with choking smoke. In castles and monasteries, even wealth could not drive away the cold. Thick walls held the chill like a curse, and tapestries on stone did little to soften it. The rich slept under layers of fur and velvet, yet their breath still misted in the air. Servants crept through corridors carrying braziers, small metal pans filled with glowing coals, to warm their masters' beds before they lay down. In such a season, the line between waking and dreaming blurred. People slept more, not out of comfort but necessity. The lack of daylight slowed their lives. This was nature's demand to rest, to endure. During the long nights, they experienced the ancient rhythm of sleeps more vividly than ever. One deep, one filled with strange half-dreams. Between them, in the midnight watch, they prayed for the return of spring, for the frost to lift, for the sound of birds once more. Superstition grew thick in winter's heart. It was believed that evil spirits roamed most freely on nights when snow silenced the world. To guard against them, people hung herbs like rosemary and juniper above their doors, or carved protective crosses into their beams. Some burned salt or iron nails in the fire to keep witches away. Even those who claimed to doubt such things still whispered a prayer before sleep. For no man wished to tempt fate when the night was long and cold. In towns and villages, community became the strongest defense. Neighbors shared food, warmth, and stories. The church bells that rang faintly through the frost were more than calls to prayer. They were lifelines, reminding all that they were not alone. On feast days like Christmas and Candlemas, people gathered in celebration, bringing candles to light the church in defiance of the night. The flicker of 1,000 flames was enough to make even the darkest winter seem temporary. But beyond the safety of hearth and chapel lay the wilderness, silent forests, frozen lakes, and mountains blanketed in snow. Those forced to travel after dark risked their lives. Wolves prowled the edges of villages, drawn by hunger. Their howls were the anthem of the cold. Travelers carried torches and iron, charms whispering prayers with each step. For many, a journey begun at dusk was a gamble with death. Yet even in these harshest nights, something within people refused to yield. They adapted, they hoped, they endured. In the dark, they found time for thought, for reflection. Monks saw winter as a season of purification. Peasants saw it as proof of their resilience. The cold stripped life down to its essence: fire, food, faith, and one another. Those who survived winter's longest nights emerged not just alive, but reborn, as though tested by some divine hand. When at last the snow began to melt and the first green shoots pierced the frozen ground, people celebrated as if the world itself had risen from the dead. They said the earth had awoken from its second sleep. bonfires were lit on hills, bells were rung, and songs were sung to greet the returning light. For those who had endured the season of darkness, dawn was more than a sunrise, it was a promise kept. And so, through every century, every frost and famine, the medieval people learned that no matter how endless the night seemed, the sun always returned. They faced their winters with courage, born not from comfort, but from faith, faith that life, like fire, flickers but never truly dies. In the deep silence of the medieval night, when fires dimmed and candles guttered out, sleep became something more than rest. It was a journey into unseen worlds, a passage through dreams and terrors that the waking mind could not bear. For the people of that age, dreams were not idle visions of the brain, but messages from God, from angels, or from the shadows that haunted the soul. The darkness that swallowed their homes also swallowed their thoughts, and when they closed their eyes, they believed they entered another realm entirely. When a man slept in total darkness, he did so with a strange reverence and a quiet fear. He did not understand sleep as science explains it now. He believed it to be a sacred mystery, a time when the spirit wandered far from the body. If he woke too suddenly, it was said that the soul might not yet have returned, leaving him weak, trembling, or half cursed. Mothers crossed themselves over their children as they drifted into slumber, whispering blessings to guard their dreams from the demons that prowled the unseen. Dreams carried great power. A dream of light meant good fortune or divine favor. A dream of water foretold travel. But darker dreams of teeth falling out, of shadows speaking, of endless falling were omens of death. The church taught that dreams could be temptations of the devil, sent to corrupt the heart. And yet, in quiet whispers, peasants still spoke of dreams as gateways to the beyond, to ancestors, to spirits, and to the saints who watched from heaven's edge. The sleeping mind, unguarded, became a battlefield. In monasteries, monks dreamed of angels and demons wrestling over their souls. In castles, knights dreamed of battles they had not yet fought. In humble cottages, farmers dreamed of their lost cattle, their dead children, or the storms that might ruin their fields. Dreams were not entertainment, they were warnings, burdens and revelations. Each morning, people awoke wondering if what they had seen was a prophecy or a curse. The darkness of the room only deepened the mystery. Imagine a world with no light save for the faint glow of dying embers, where your hand before your face was invisible. The walls creaked with the cold, rats moved through the thatch, and outside wolves called across frozen hills. In such stillness, the mind filled the void with voices. The sleeper's breath mingled with whispers that seemed not his own. When the night stretched too long, men said that sleep opened the gate between worlds, that those who dreamed too deeply might never wake, their souls caught between heaven and earth. Sleep paralysis, though they did not know its name, was one of their greatest terrors. They called it the night hag or the mare. When a man awoke unable to move, feeling a weight upon his chest, he believed a demon sat on him, pressing the life from his body. He could not scream, could not pray, only gasp in silence as he saw shadowy shapes crouched over him. Some said these were witches who crept into homes in spirit form. Others said they were lost souls seeking warmth in the living. Whatever the truth, the fear was real, and every dawn brought thankful prayers from those who survived the night untouched. Nightmares were not dismissed, they were recorded. Medieval dream books, written by monks and mystics, claimed to interpret these visions. They said that dreaming of flying meant divine favor, but dreaming of fire meant sin. Dreaming of being chased was a warning from one's guardian angel. Dreaming of drowning meant confession was needed before death. Every dream, no matter how small, was a map of the soul's journey. For many, the second sleep was when such dreams came most vividly. After waking from the first sleep to pray, to tend the fire, or to whisper in the dark, they returned to bed, and that was when visions came strongest. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurred. Men swore they heard their names spoken aloud, though no one stirred. Women told of seeing dead loved ones sitting at their bedsides, smiling silently. To them, this was not madness but meaning, proof that the dead still lingered, that the night held more than darkness. Some dreams were shared, or so they claimed. In villages, neighbors sometimes awoke with the same vision, a fire in the woods, a figure cloaked in light, or a voice crying across the night. When such dreams spread, fear followed. The priest would be called, candles lit, and prayers sung to banish the spirit that haunted their sleep. In those moments, even the bravest men refused to close their eyes again until dawn. There were also those who sought dreams deliberately. Hermits, prophets, and wandering mystics slept in caves or graveyards, believing the darkness itself could teach them. They fasted, prayed, and surrendered to sleep as though stepping through a sacred door. Some awoke claiming they had seen visions of the Virgin, others spoke of fiery angels or the apocalypse to come. Whether madness or revelation, no one dared to mock them, for in that world, dreams could change the fate of kingdoms, and yet, not all dreams were divine. Many believed that demons used sleep to whisper wicked thoughts into the hearts of men. Lustful visions, false hopes, or nightmares of despair were seen as spiritual attacks. The faithful were told to sleep with a crucifix near their bed, or a prayer written on parchment tied around their wrist. Some hung holy relics over their doors to guard their dreams. Even kings were not spared. Chroniclers tell of rulers waking in terror, claiming to have seen their own death in sleep. Still, morning always came. The first light pierced the shutters, the cock crowed, and the dreams began to fade like mist. But their memory lingered. A man might carry the weight of a single dream for the rest of his life, shaping his choices, his fears, his faith. In the medieval mind, to sleep was to surrender, to give one's soul to the mysteries of the night and trust that it would return with the dawn. Dreams were the voice of the unseen world, speaking in riddles only the heart could hear. And in those long hours of total darkness, when the stars seemed closer than the earth itself, men and women learned to live with wonder and terror alike, believing that even their dreams were part of God's design. When the first grey light crept over the medieval world, it did not come in silence. It came with the slow stirring of life, the crack of frost on timber, the breath of cattle in their stalls, and the low whisper of prayers from half-dreaming lips. Morning was not an instant awakening, but a slow rebirth from darkness. For those who had slept through the long, heavy night, the coming of dawn was nothing less than a small miracle. It meant survival. It meant that the darkness, with all its unseen terrors, had passed once more. Before the sun rose, a faint glimmer of light slipped through cracks in shutters, painting thin silver lines across the room. In a peasant's cottage, this was the first sign that night's hold was loosening. The fire, long reduced to embers, was coaxed back to life by the householder, often the woman of the home. She knelt by the hearth, blowing gently on the coals, feeding them with dry twigs. The smoke rose in lazy spirals, catching in the cold air, until at last a flame flickered to life. A small, defiant son of her own making. Children stirred under their wool blankets, rubbing sleep from their eyes. The warmth of shared sleep slowly gave way to the chill of morning. In many homes, people slept fully dressed or wrapped in layers of coarse linen and animal skins. So that rising from bed was less about comfort and more about duty. To greet the morning meant to begin again, to work, to pray, to live another day under the eye of God. The act of waking carried with it a quiet spirituality. In monasteries, it was ritualized. In peasant homes, it was instinct. Before words were spoken, there was gratitude, a soft breath of thanks whispered into the air. Some crossed themselves before standing, believing that the soul, which had wandered during sleep, was now safely returned to the body. Others murmured fragments of the Lord's Prayer, half asleep, their faith woven into the rhythm of waking itself. In great halls and castles, servants rose before the dawn to prepare for their masters. They moved silently through corridors still cloaked in shadow, lighting torches, rekindling fires, and opening shutters to the dim blue light of morning. The air was cold enough to bite the skin, yet every sound, the clang of iron pots, the shuffle of feet, the murmur of prayer, signaled the same thing: life had begun again. For monks, morning was not merely a time, but a duty. The bell for Lauds, the dawn prayer, echoed across the cloister. They gathered in the chapel, faces pale in the half-light, chanting psalms to greet the rising sun. Their voices, soft and solemn, carried through the still air like smoke. Each word was a victory over darkness. The world had survived another night, and with the sun's return came a renewed vow to serve. In villages, waking was marked by sound, the crow of roosters, the creak of cartwheels. The the bark of dogs. Smoke began to curl from chimneys as every hearth awoke. Farmers stepped outside to gauge the sky, squinting at the first hints of color above the trees. If clouds were red, it was a warning. If gold, a promise of fair weather. The world was read like scripture, and every dawn told its own story. Those who had dreamt through the night sometimes carried their visions into the morning. A woman might whisper to her husband that she dreamed of clear water, a good omen for the day. A man who dreamed of wolves might cross, himself wary of misfortune. Dreams did not vanish with sunlight. They clung like mist until spoken aloud or forgotten in labor. Morning, then, was also a time of quiet reflection, a chance to measure what had been seen in darkness against what waited in the light. Breakfast, though meager, was sacred. Bread hardened by the night's chill was softened in warm broth or ale. Children chewed slowly, eyes still heavy, while elders muttered blessings over the meal. Food was not taken for granted. It was the body's light, just as prayer was the soul's. For many, this was the only meal before hours of toil. The rising sun was their clock, and the warmth it promised was the only comfort they needed. In the cities, bells from churches and markets began to clash and call. The streets filled with movement, merchants ranging their wares, beggars stirring from corners, guards changing their watch. The city awoke like a great beast stretching its limbs after slumber. The smell of smoke, dung, and baking bread filled the air, thick and alive. In the countryside, shepherds called to their flocks, and the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoed like a heartbeat through the fog. Yet for all its noise, morning remained fragile, a delicate bridge between the mystery of night and the labor of day. It was a time when people still half believed in dreams, when shadows clung to corners, and when the first rays of sunlight seemed almost holy. In that moment, even the hardest men softened. They bowed their heads, whispered their prayers, and felt the warmth touch their faces like forgiveness. The medieval morning was not just light breaking darkness, it was rebirth. Each dawn reaffirmed the ancient truth that had guided generations, that every night, no matter how endless, must yield to day. It was a lesson written in the rhythm of life itself, to endure, to rise, to begin again. As the sun climbed higher, its light turned from grey to gold. The frost on the fields melted into dew. Smoke drifted lazily into the brightening sky. The world, once a realm of shadow and fear, now gleamed with promise. And though the memory of darkness lingered in every heart, the morning gave them courage once more, courage to work, to hope, and to face the coming night when it returned. For medieval people, waking was not ordinary, it was sacred. To open one's eyes in the light meant to have survived the trial of the dark. And every morning, in every hut, hall, and monastery, they greeted the day with the same silent prayer. We have lived through the night again. The medieval world moved to a rhythm older than kings and kingdoms. The endless turning of night into day and day into night. To live in those times was to dwell in the fragile space between light and shadow, life, and the whisper of death. Every sunset marked the beginning of a trial. Every sunrise, the mercy of survival. And so the people of that age learned to revere both the terror and the tenderness of existence. For without one, the other could not be understood. When dusk came, it arrived not suddenly, but like a slow breath drawn by the earth itself. The sky deepened from gold to violet, and the first stars trembled into being. In every village, shutters were drawn, fires stirred, prayers spoken. The day's work ended, and the hush of evening settled upon thatch and stone. The world seemed to exhale, weary, quiet, waiting. There was comfort in the familiar pattern. Darkness would come, but so too would the light after. For medieval people, this eternal exchange was sacred. They saw the sun and moon as living guardians, forever chasing each other across the heavens. When the sun fell, the moon rose to watch over the sleepers. When the moon faded, the sun returned to guide the living. This ceaseless motion, day yielding to night, night surrendering to day, was the heartbeat of creation itself. Every life, no matter how humble, was bound to it. In monasteries, the rhythm was honored with bells and prayer. Monks marked each hour with song, matins, lauds, vespers. Compline, as if reminding heaven that they still waited in faith, their voices rising through the night, while like lanterns carried against the dark. The sound reached far beyond the cloister walls, faint but unbroken, a hymn of defiance and devotion. In cottages and keeps, the rhythm was less formal but no less real. Mothers hushed children beneath heavy blankets, fathers checked the hearth, dogs curled near the door. The darkness outside pressed close, but within life pulsed gently. The crackle of fire, the murmur of breath, the creak of wood, even in fear, there was beauty. The people did not see night as the enemy of life, but as its shadow twin. As centuries passed, the cycle endured unchanged. Empires rose and fell. Plagues swept through towns, wars burned the land, yet still the sun set and the stars returned. The same moon watched over kings and peasants alike. It glimmered on sword and scythe, on cathedral spire and muddy field. It was witness to both prayer and despair, and when dawn came, washing away the night, it carried the promise that even suffering had an end. In that world of uncertainty, the constancy of night and day was the one truth people could trust. Time was not counted in hours, but in light. Morning meant survival. Evening meant surrender. Yet neither was final. Even the darkest night bowed to the smallest flame, and even the brightest day knew it must dim again. This understanding shaped their souls, teaching patience, humility, and faith. By candlelight, people told stories of the stars, of spirits who carried dreams, of angels who watched in silence. The flicker of flame was their teacher, showing how fragile life was and yet how enduring. They knew that just as the candle's wax melted, their days, too, would fade. But the flame itself, the soul, was eternal, and it would rise again like dawn. There were nights when storms shook the earth and thunder roared through the sky. In those moments, the medieval heart trembled but did not despair, for they had seen the sun return too many times to doubt its coming. And when morning finally broke through the clouds, the light seemed brighter for all that darkness had tried to take. To sleep in total darkness was to accept the unknown, to surrender control and trust the rhythm that governed all things. They lay down in shadow knowing that light would find them again. Their lives were woven into the same pattern as the heavens, rest and rise, fall and renew. This faith, quiet but unshakable, carried them through ages of hardship. At last, as the sun rose over the fields, glinting on dew and stone, the world seemed to awaken not just from sleep but from history itself. Birds cried out from church towers, and the smell of bread drifted from every home. The light poured into open shutters and across faces that had endured the long night. The people did not speak of it, yet in their hearts they understood. This was the gift of life, given once more. The medieval world has long since vanished, its fires cold, its prayers faded into the wind. But the rhythm remains. We still rise and rest beneath the same sky, our lives turning like theirs did, in the eternal dance of night and day. And though our nights may no longer be dark, we still carry their wisdom in our bones. That light means nothing without darkness, and every dawn is a victory over fear. So, when we look upon the stars, we see not only the past but the promise they once believed, that the cycle never ends. The night will come, the day will follow, and the world will keep breathing in its quiet, sacred rhythm. The medieval people slept in total darkness, but they dreamed of light, and perhaps in that, they were wiser than we will ever be.